The South African government will be working with Tanzanian authorities to bring back Thabo and Dr. Nandipha Magudumana to face justice. The two were arrested together with a Mozambican national in Arusha following a joint intelligence operation by the Tanzanian authorities. Joining us now to discuss the various options available for them to be legally brought back to the country, we're joined by legal expert Advocate Mpilonhle Baloyi. Advocate Baloyi, thank you so much for making time. So there are two different aspects here. You've got these guys as foreign nationals in Tanzania. They are there illegally from what the ministers told us. But there's also an extradition process here that is available because they are fugitives of justice. Just help us understand the two differences of approaches that can be taken here.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. With this particular matter, things are a little bit different, and there's a dual process, as you've already mentioned, because we're looking at both extradition and deportation. And in the circumstances, the government, and in liaison with the Tanzanian government, has an option to decide which one is the best one possible. Now, when we look at the Besta matter in particular, that one is a clear-cut case of deportation. Because when we look at extradition and the Extradition Act, it usually focuses on a fugitive that needs to come back and stand trial and face those consequences. However, in this situation, Besta has already been tried, convicted, sentenced, and was already serving his sentence. So in that particular instance, it's deportation that needs to play its part. So there we look at our Immigration Act. And when we look at our Immigration Act as well as the Immigration Act of Tanzania, they are quite similar in how they do things. I mean, if you look at deportation in South Africa as we traditionally apply it on foreign nationals, we can expect a similar process where they are concerned. But however, with these special circumstances and with them being on the run, there is a high intervention from government, Interpol, and all other security agencies that will ensure that they are brought back. So it's not a typical extradition matter as we would have seen with the Bushiri or the Gupta matters. So the two, now with the doctor, also has now also been charged. So, but now, looking at the fact that they are together in this thing, the one process and what the Tanzanian government has committed to assist on is the one of actually deporting them back instead of an extradition process. So extradition process is a very long one because there has to be a request from South Africa. There has to be an extradition hearing in that country. So that takes much longer. But in these circumstances, it's not the necessary option, rather deportation. Yes.
Let's talk more about deportation, because immigration officers would have to file the appropriate paperwork to deport people, I imagine. How long does that process take? And does it have to play out in the courts in Tanzania, or is it a matter of when our officials land in Tanzania today, they work through the process and we can have them back in South Africa as soon as tomorrow?
It's very difficult to speculate on the time periods in particular, but the deportation process is very much shorter than the extradition process. And as we already know, I don't know if our officials are already there, and with the high cooperation, so perhaps within a shortened space of time, we could expect them back to come and, I mean, for Besta, it's for him to come and continue with his sentence, and charges like escape from lawful custody, those will be dealt with once he's back in, and together with his accomplice and also the other Mozambican national who is part of this, then after they're brought back, then that goes out into play.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that their immigration laws are almost similar to ours here in South Africa. I'm just trying to find out whether there's a possibility that they can find loopholes in how their arrest was executed to try and challenge it before the deportation can take effect. So ordinarily in South Africa, if someone is here illegally, what is the process? Because I imagine you don't get them into a bus and you are sending them back to their country. Often we would send them to the Lindela Center. They've got to be processed, and then they make their way back to their country. They are deported. And there may be options for people to perhaps even challenge that in the court. Is that option available for Thabo Bester, where they have to be taken to a center first, they've got to be processed before they are deported, and maybe an opportunity can arise where they find a loophole to challenge it, because then they delay the process of them coming back home?
That's a very good question. Now, when you look at that and compare it with the extradition, that's where the longer process in, and that's where there's a bigger room for technicalities, because it's a very long application where the particular request has to be of a particular form and not lack. For example, with the Gupta extradition, which has been denied, there were a lot of loopholes on technicalities. But with deportation, traditionally, as I mentioned earlier on, in South Africa, you would have a situation where a foreign national is arrested, let's say at an airport or on the streets. They then appear before a court. Then there would be that proclamation that indeed they are in the country illegally. Now, you have an option of voluntary deportation. So deportation is not an aggregate term where once a person is caught on legal, remember we're talking about illegal entry and exit. So the minute you're caught, you are immediately sent to Lindela and you wait to be taken home. So in this instance, you find that there are people who, yes, are being deported, but if they've got financial means, they can actually even show that to court to say, I've already booked a flight.
To go back home.
Yes, and you get into that, and there's evidence, and that's also processed by
which is not an option we hope they will go for.
So in this instance, that will not be
we could lose them again,
because they will be escorted back. Remember, they are also fugitives. So the security agencies will also play a very big part in making sure that they come home safely.
So immigrants can sometimes ask for asylum with a country, and then they can claim, well, we are in danger back at home. We're not safe back at home. And the reason I was asking about the possibility of challenging it, I mean, it's not unthinkable that Thabo Bester could want to argue that if I go back to South Africa, my life is at risk. Am I even going to be safe, even when I'm going to be in custody of the police? Is that something that will be entertained, given how brazen he has been in not just, living large in South Africa after escaping, but I mean, the resources that he's had to also move between countries, and how he was found about to even escape Tanzania as well?
That option is highly likely not to be the case, because if you look at how the whole scenario plays itself, we are not talking refugee status. The Refugee Act is very clear on the requirements for refugees and so on, and also Immigration Act. So the two acts, the Immigration Act as well as the Refugee Act, they complement each other. And it's not a card that you can just pull when you feel you are in danger or take advantage of. So that will not be an option which will be available for him.
So there have to be specific circumstances for you to, for that refugee status. Let's talk about the cooperation between the two countries. I think what we've seen with the extradition failing with the Guptas is that there hasn't been proper cooperation between the UAE authorities and South African authorities. I mean, we found out of the decision on Thursday when it was made in February already, for instance, and even the Justice Minister has said in the past that there's been frustrations in getting information from the UAE authorities. Do you think that we are at a better position now? Yes, the circumstances are different because, as you said, the likelihood is deportation, but that's still going to require cooperation. If that deportation is to happen as swiftly as possible, cooperation between South Africa and Tanzania. The ministers seem to be confident that they'll get it. But when there's swift, proper, efficient cooperation, does that assist in matters like this?
Absolutely. It has to assist. Remember, we need to deal also with the systems of both countries, the effectiveness and the efficiency of the internal systems of both countries. And if we consider the system of Tanzania, as I've already indicated, that their Immigration Act mirrors our own quite a lot. And the pledged support and the pledged cooperation that they've already indicated, that does assist. As opposed to the Gupta matter. When they appeared in court in February, South Africa was not even aware that that's the case. So there was not even proper communication. When there was a request sent, they did not request further particulars which were lacking, which now later became a technicality to say that we cannot bring them back. So that particular coherence and that particular cooperation between the two nations does expedite processes.
Yeah. Lastly, what happens if the foreign national has committed a crime in that country? Because in this case, Thabo Bester, we're hearing that they tried to evade arrest, number one. But number two, they were found with different passports that have different identities. So I imagine that's a crime they're committing in Tanzania. Does that matter when they have to go through the processes around deportation, where they say, okay, you also have to face some of the crimes you've committed here? Or is what you've committed in your own country then takes precedence, or the fact that you are here illegally, you go back? Or is there a possibility that Tanzania would say, we want to hold you accountable for these fraudulent identities. We want to hold you accountable for trying to evade arrest before we throw you back to your country?
It would depend on the Tanzanian criminal justice system. But remember, they traveled from South Africa and crossed a couple of countries before getting to Tanzania. They are arrested about 10 kilometers from Kenya. And we would then have to say that these crimes and these false identities and these multiple passports, they've gone through a few countries. And if they have to be prosecuted for all those different things, it will depend again on the internal laws of each and every country. But in this instance, and with the cooperation that we hear that is to take place with the Tanzanian government, I don't foresee that being the case. I foresee them just being sent back, this one going to continue with his sentence, and the others facing their charges because there are already warrants of arrest for them. Yeah.
Advocate Mpilonhle Baloyi, thank you so much for coming through and helping us understand these processes much better.